Hey everyone, welcome to Famous Last Words. My name is Evan DeGraff. This is kind of the interview conversationalist based podcast that we do here on the PJ Campbell Network. I am your host for today. Look, it's been a hot minute since I've done a Famous Last Words. Life kind of gets in the way, even during COVID-19. Weird things happen, and you think you're doing a show, and then you're not. But we're back, and I am very, very happy to have the guest that we have on today. Him and I have become pretty good friends over quarantine. Thanks to our good pal PJ Campbell, and over making content together, either talking shit and even a fun little Mario Kart sesh. Our friendship's blossomed since then, and it's been one of my favorite people to talk to in this space. But before we get into that, just a couple of things to announce. This was a while ago, but this was one of my favorite things I've been on with him so far. The Son of the Soundtracks for Hamilton with myself, Alex Marzonia, and PJ Campbell. Such a great time. Make sure you guys check out my last Famous Last Words. That was our 10th anniversary episode. That episode's only at 22 views, which is weird because Chris Clark has been around longer than 22 years. So at least get that up a little bit more. It was a really fun shoot. And then last but not least, Little Shop of Horrors is coming out very soon. So keep your eyes open for that. It's going to be a really good time. Last but not least, let's just jump into it. I'm very, very excited to announce my guest and sit down and actually talk to him. We have Maxwell Haddad. Welcome to the stream, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you tonight?
I'm all right. Keyword all right. Something I've learned is through all this is to be okay with just being okay. Like, you're not always going to have a great day. You're not always going to have a good day. But an okay day is an okay.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
You're wise beyond your years.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, with all the events happening, I would say you kind of joined the channel right once the Black Lives, Matter protests started actually ramping up and becoming this full fruition movement that we shall be paying very careful attention to and supporting happened. And then here you are, you're now like a regular, one of the main hosts of one of the coolest shows that we have. You're always on the watch longs. Like you kind of weaseled your way in here. How do you feel about like being like part of the YouTube scene now, or at least in the film community at least?
Well, I've been friends with PJ for a while. And when he used to do the PJ Campbell Show as an audio podcast, like a couple years ago, we always kept talking how I would come on, I'd be a guest, or how we should launch our own Broadway podcast. And, people procrastinate, things get in the way, life gets in the way. And with quarantine, your biggest fan is in the chat.
Yeah, it's my buddy Trent, and we play Smash together. What's up, Trent?
With quarantine, the one thing that I think most everyone has had is extra time. And with extra time comes loneliness, comes depression and anxiety, and you are constantly searching for things to do that feel constructive, right? So like I've read a lot, I watched a lot of movies, spent time with my wife and my dogs, but as fun as that can be, I like to always be bringing something to the world, as minimal as it may be, as insignificant as may be. So when PJ first asked me to come on his network a couple months ago, it felt nice just to, first of all, hanging out with friends, but in a way that was constructive. And, we have a good amount of subscribers now and a really loyal fan base who keeps coming back for the watch-alongs, for the PJ Campbell Show when we do it for family game night. So it's been like the main source of comfort to me throughout this entire period, because it's like, what am I going to do today? I don't know, but I know at 10 o'clock, I'm going to be on the PJ Campbell Network talking about things I like with people I like. And if some people decide to watch it, great. And if not, honestly, like, it's still fun for us. So I don't care that much about, it's nice to have viewers and it's nice to have people that care, but it's still fun for me to do it, whatever the show may be.
What I really like about it, and especially the fan base, I put in quotations because calling people fans is still kind of weird to me, and I don't know if it sits right, is that we've created a community of people. Mike K, BCD shows up from time to time. Kale. Just
who got on the network last night.
I know, that was a lot of fun.
I'm really happy to see.
It saved our asses during the Incredibles 2, because my God, I love PJ and I love myself, but doing a watch along with just two people is really difficult because
Yeah,
sometimes you just want to sit back and watch the movie and you don't get that chance.
right.
So it was great having Kale on and getting a different perspective that the channel hasn't seen yet.
And you know, it's hard not to talk about the PJ Campbell Network without also talking about the Schmodown, because there's obviously a lot of crossover. You know, a lot of the people who come and watch it probably first knew about PJ because of his involvement with the Schmodown, and originally, you know, his fandom with the Schmodown. Like, PJ is such a gregarious guy that even before he was officially working for them, everyone knew who he was because he's just a charmer. You know, so it's nice to see that. You know, and I think, and I believe me, I'm not casting aspersions on anyone, but what I like about this network is it's like ancillary to the Schmodown, but we don't really talk about the Schmodown. There are more than enough incredibly good reaction shows and Schmodown based shows, whether it be Call to Action or a Certain Point of View or all those.
Let's get ready to Schmodown.
Yeah, let's get ready to Schmodown. That it's, you know, it's cool that we get people from the Schmodown to come and watch, but we're talking about other stuff, right?
And I think that's also like what I appreciate about you and joining the network too. You had a totally different and fresh perspective, especially when adding you onto the team, because you're someone that lives in the city. None of us do. You're someone that is deeply involved in Broadway, more than any of us. As much as I love Broadway and as much as high school theater was a big part of my uprising, I'm not as nearly as involved as you were. You are LGBTQIA plus, which is an important perspective to have, especially when we're trying to grow and evolve our inclusivity. Not that it was a good ad, it was also a really good, and at least for me, addition to our friend group that we're having too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, I am openly and proudly bisexual. It's not something I necessarily go around like, you know, saying all the time. Not because, again, I'm not proud of it, but I don't want to ever be like token. You know, I do not represent the queer community. I'm a member of it, but I don't speak for them. You know, I'm not going anywhere just to be like, oh, we have someone who's queer, and that is, you know, was never a case. But and I think that's important in all sorts of representation. Like, people are there because they're there, and then whatever community they happen to be a part of is a plus.
No, exactly. And
tokenism gets really icky really fast, as far as I'm concerned.
It is. And it was, and when I learned about it, I was just like, oh, check. Yeah, why not? And then from there, I'm trying, what was the first watch on that you and I did together? It was before the protests started happening.
Some of the early ones was like Lilo and Stitch and Atlantis. I'm trying to think.
I think Lilo and Stitch might have been the first one.
Any before that, I don't know.
Because we had James White on too. But Lilo and Stitch is also one of your favorite anime movies of all time.
Yeah, I love that movie.
I think that hits a certain demographic. Because my audience likes it a lot, but we're not as in love with it as say you, James, or even PJ. Because you guys fall hard for that movie, which is good. Don't get me wrong, but like what I love about having you on and like and just the network in general is like I really get to see the difference in ages and how people react to different forms of media.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact of the matter is, you know, any love of art, whether it be film, music, theater, television, a lot of it has to do with what generation you're in, because, you know, you were probably too young to not necessarily see it in theaters, although maybe you would have been like, what? It was 2002, so you'd have been
really 2 years old.
Right,
maybe
so
one and a half.
Probably too young to see it in theaters, and even if you had, you wouldn't remember it.
No.
Right. Meanwhile, I saw it in theaters. I remember it vividly because I'm 33 now, so I'm much older than you. It's not funny. I'm not that. You know, so I was almost like pretty much an adult already. So I wouldn't say I grew up with that movie, but I do think it's a film that, you know, of a lot of more recent Disney animated films deals with more mature themes.
Yeah.
You have, you know, sisters who are orphans, which is not unusual for Disney. You know, not many Disney animated characters have parents, but I think the dichotomy of it, in that it was a young teenage sister trying to raise and support her young daughter, her young sister, excuse me, made for some more complex themes. And then you bring in the alien stuff. So, and I think I used to blog a lot. I used to have a couple different movie blogs where I wrote reviews all the time. I wrote essays, and I kind of got burnt out on that because at the end of the day, I would watch movies always thinking about what I'm going to write about it instead of just watching it to engage with it and enjoy it.
Right.
So I stopped. But I remember writing a piece at one point about how I feel like Lilo and Stitch is a really good representation of the modern American family, because I don't think there's any, checklist of what makes a modern American family.
It's becoming more and more rare to find your typical nuclear family,
Yeah,
which is more than okay. And I think that shows good progression, at least in the States, where it's now more acceptable for there not to be a nuclear family as long as everybody else is happy in the position that they're in.
for sure. And as long as they're loving and supportive and taking care of it, because you have the older sister, the younger sister, and the alien, and the three of them form a strong bond. And then, of course, the other two aliens who are there to watch over them, if you watch the series, pretty much became a part of the family.
Yeah.
All living in the house. So movie means a lot to me. I have a couple different. I'm actually looking on the opposite wall at a Lilo and Stitch poster, and we have another art piece in the other room.
So let's hop into it then. You're obviously known for your Broadway stuff, but you're also a huge film fan.
Mm-hmm.
You love movies, and not to say it out loud, but if you were to compete in the Schmodown, I think you'd have a real shot at shaking some people in their seats.
If given the opportunity, I would love to do that. I did go to film school. It was very expensive. I spent my entire college career studying film. I took as few non-film classes as possible. I took a bunch of like different English classes, like Shakespeare, modern American literature, that sort of thing. But beyond those classes and film classes, I took the minimal amount of like core classes.
Right.
Just like the one math class I had to, the one science class. Because I was in like an arts program freshman year, I had to take like a music appreciation class, which was so easy because like music theory is something I've always been good at. I can read music, I can write, like I know how to write music on sheet music and stuff like that. So yeah, like film, it was like I was 14. I always loved going to the movies. That was always like my number one activity. But it was when I was like 14 that I really fell in love with film as an art form and knew at that point that I wanted to become a filmmaker. I've sort of diverged a little bit from that, although I'm not saying I'm never going to make a film. That's still something I would love to do. And especially as technology has become increasingly accessible. I mean, look at what
shoot with your phone.
Yeah, what Sean Baker did with Tangerine. You could just go out and make a movie with your iPhone, a couple of extra lenses, an app called Filmic Pro, and just go to town. So,
and it's fun, and there, a couple of things to unpack there. But first, I think the most interesting in that is that like something I'm beginning to learn, especially becoming younger and going through school and making connections. I put that in quotation marks because that's its whole other thing. It's keeping your options open.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're either going to fall in love with or what opportunities are going to come about you. But I want to get into the fact you were 14 when you fell in love with film. Mm-hmm. Do you know who else was also 14 when they fell in love with movies and realized that's probably a passion of theirs?
You?
Me.
What was that, like a year ago?
Yeah, no, it was actually 6 months ago.
Yeah, okay.
I just turned 15. So what I find that interesting, I think I think this happens for a lot of people. The year 14, and then I think it's like 16, 17-ish are two really big monumental years for a lot of people because you grow out of that, oh, I'm 13, I'm a teenager. You actually become, oh, I'm actually maturing a little bit. And you actually start to learn what your actual interests are, just more than just, oh, this movie is a lot of fun and I'm watching it with my friends. You're like, oh, this is cool. So what kind of movies, or was there like a single movie where it hit you? You're like, oh, I love movies.
Oh yeah.
Crap.
Yeah, it's Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia, which to this day is my favorite movie. So freshman year of high school, my lunch period and my study hall were back to back. If you kept up good enough grades, you got an extra free period for study hall. You didn't have to take like a homeroom class sort of thing.
So this was in Florida?
Yeah, it was a private school. It's like a prep school.
Oh, okay. Let's say Florida isn't that good for this. Like, let's not.
No, it was a like a preppy, kind of expensive private school, which I have a lot of thoughts and opinions on. But so I had these 2 periods back to back, so it ended up being like 80, 85 minutes.
Right.
So I would normally sneak lunch into the library because you really weren't supposed to eat, but they had these like private desks on the walls around the stacks that were like little cubbies, and I'd always pop open my laptop and watch either a full film or as much of a film as I could. So I don't remember what part of the year it was, but I had got Magnolia from Blockbuster, put the DVD in my laptop. The next thing I knew, I had missed every single class that day because I sat and watched all 3 hours and 15 minutes of it.
Really?
Yeah. Like
That's a story.
it totally encaptured me, and time stopped to exist. Reality stopped to exist. I just couldn't look away.
Now, did you get suspended?
No, they didn't care. I was a pretty good student, so didn't matter. You know, I was also a big teacher's pet, so
Okay.
like apologized the next day. And I had freshman year I had very good attendance. Junior year is another story.
I'm so sorry. Here's all my homework. I didn't mean to skip class, but I got all my work done. Don't
Yeah,
worry about it.
pretty much, yeah.
So you fall in love with Magnolia. PTA has this certain charm with his filmmaking, for better or worse. Like, I've only seen one PTA film you and I've talked about. It's Phantom Thread. Even that has its really weird charm to it. You just kind of fall in love with the movie for what it does. But we move forward. You fall in with PTA. You fall in with Magnolia. What from there progresses like, oh, one of my passions now is movies, to, oh, what if I want to start making movies? And like, what kind of drives you forward towards film school?
Yeah, so after seeing Magnolia, I sort of shifted the way I would rent movies at the video store. I know I'm older than you. We would go to the video store. Streaming wasn't a thing at all. Internet wasn't really fast. Like, people at home didn't have fast enough internet to stream things when I was in high school.
Right.
So it was DVDs or VHS or bust. So I sort of started to consciously shift from just like watching like the new releases or like the popular movies and exploring the history of film. I went to Barnes and Noble. I bought a couple books. I watched all the other PTA films he had made at that point, and then I watched Tarantino's movies, and then went back to like Hitchcock and like the French New Wave, and started watching like Truffaut's stuff and 8 1/2 and all those movies to really start building like giving myself my own crash course in film history. At a certain point, I realized, why don't we try making films? So my friends and I would take our little like handy cam and just shoot scenes. We tried making a feature, never finished it, but it was just fun to like be on set, to write stuff, to hang out with friends. So, but yeah, ever from that moment, I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to film school.
And did you move to New York because of film school, or was it right before?
Well, I lived in New York. I grew up in New York till I was 4.
Okay.
And my dad worked in New York, so he was always traveling back and forth. He would do like 2 weeks in Florida, 2 weeks in New York. My dad does real estate and like owns property, so he did that in New York and then also had stuff in Florida. So like I would go up to New York on the weekends sometime just for that, and then I spent all the summers in New York. So New York has always been like a part of my lifeblood.
Okay.
Like, even when I was a kid, even though I grew up in Florida, I was like, oh, I live in Florida, but I'm a New Yorker.
I mean, who wants to say that they're from Florida? Like,
yeah, I mean, Florida it's almost its own country. It has its own set of rules, its own kind of people. I grew up in in South Florida, where I grew up is not as Florida-y as like the Panhandle or Central Florida or like Destin, but it's still Florida.
But there's different parts of Florida. Like, you have the Boca area.
That's where I grew up.
Right. But then you have Miami.
Yeah.
And then you have places in comparison to like Orlando to Tampa. And then the Panhandle to Tallahassee. And then you even have Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Just this really weird conglomerate of like what the United States is.
And then you have Destin, which is in another time zone than the entire rest of Florida, which I don't think a lot of people know about.
No, look, as much as I like to shit on the state, it really is incredible just how much weirdness is there, and it is something to explore.
Yeah, and I lived there for 14 years, so I feel like I'm a little more of an authority and get to make fun of Florida more than some other people, because Florida gets a bad rap. A lot of it's deserved, but there's also good stuff there. Like, I look back at those 14 years and I went through some rough times, but it wasn't awful.
Yeah, it's not like living in Mississippi.
Well, I'm not going to cast aspersions on other states, but it was a fine place to grow up.
So then from there, you decide to go to film school. What school did you go to?
I went to Drexel University in Philadelphia. I went around and visited a lot of schools, most that had a film program, some that didn't. And honestly, what sold me on Drexel was like week one, you were in film classes, touching a camera, fiddling around.
Really?
If you look at NYU, for example, which is, regarded as one of the best film schools, you pretty much have to do 2 years of core classes before you even start touching cameras in year 3. And that to me was a waste of time, because this may get me in trouble, but my philosophy is I'm not saying it's a waste of time, but I believe you should go to college and do something you love and learn something you love, as opposed to focusing on something that could give you a career, because so few people that I know, and I think in our generation and in the generations younger than me, end up doing as a career what it is they studied in college.
Yeah.
So if you love film or music or theater or art history or whatever, or science, study what you love, because you will take other classes. You will become well-rounded, especially if you go to, a liberal arts school where they have a lot to offer. But don't make, in my opinion, and I'm just saying it's my opinion, don't make the mistake of not studying what you love in college because someone says, well, you should study finance or math or accounting. If you love that stuff, great.
Do it.
But, so I was focusing on film schools. I like Drexel because from week one, you got to play with the cameras. And I also liked that it was a big city, close enough to New York. But I wanted, I always knew I was going to end up in New York when I was an adult, whatever that means. But I like the idea of trying somewhere different that was not as fast paced. Because the great thing about Philly is it's a big city that feels like a small town.
Really?
That was my experience there. Yeah. Excuse me.
You're good.
It's a little quieter than New York. It's a little slower paced. It still has, it's still a big city. It has a great food scene, great art scene, great independent theaters. If a movie was opening in New York and LA first, Philly would get it the next week. So I wasn't waiting long to go see all the indies I wanted to see. But I really liked Philly. And then I stayed on a 5th year and got a graduate degree in television management, which is a super specific degree that only like 2 colleges in the country offer.
I mean, and also like when you break that down, that's also a really interesting degree to have, especially if you decide to bring your career in a specific direction, because television management is practically a line producer role. Like when you break it down.
Yeah. So when I was in film school, this professor came and joined the staff. I want to say my junior year. His name was Andrew Susskind.
Okay.
He had come from NYU. His dad, David Susskind, was one of the original television talk show hosts in the 60s. So he came from like a legacy of television. And Andrew Susskind was a producer and director on The King of Queens for a long time. He worked on Seinfeld a little bit. He was like a TV guy through and through. And then at a certain point, he shifted from wanting to work in the industry to teaching. So he really became my mentor. Oh. So interestingly, junior year of college, I really fell in love with television as an art form. I always liked TV. I watched shows. I binged them before binging was a term used for television. I would buy like complete seasons on DVD at Best Buy or Circuit City, which doesn't exist anymore, and watch them.
I don't think I've ever heard of Circuit City.
Circuit City was like the major competitor for Best Buy. Its coloration was all red. It sold the same stuff, appliances, electronics, computer, DVDs, and it went out of business, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years ago. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, that makes sense.
But yeah, this guy, Andrew, really instilled a love for television to me. And I started taking every class he offered in television. And then I started hanging out in his office because he was kind of a big deal. He had like a big office with like a couch. And we would just talk and pick each other's brains. And at a certain point, he was like, who you remind me of? Brandon Tartikoff. Brandon Tartikoff was like the programming director of NBC in the early 90s. Like he was responsible for like Friends, ER, all these shows that really put NBC on the map.
That's one hell of a compliment.
Yeah, it was a compliment. And so I started thinking, well, maybe that's what I should go do. I should go work like in the offices of a television network and help like shape when certain shows are aired, which shows get picked up. So I went and did an internship at Jimmy Kimmel Live out in LA. Because one of the things about Drexel is it's a co-op school. So for 6 months, your junior year, you have to go get a job.
Oh.
If you don't do that, you don't get a degree.
Wow.
So that was one of the other exciting things about Drexel. It did mean that instead of semesters, we worked on a quarter system.
Okay.
So my entire college career, I only had one summer off freshman year. Once I came back for sophomore year, it was nonstop school because those 2 quarters you were doing the job would have been your summer
Right.
for sophomore and junior year. But that was a thrilling experience working for Jimmy Kimmel. And I think learning on the job is one of the best ways to learn. You're like dropped in. I was 20. I turned 21 the summer I was working there, but when I got to LA, I was 20. I was like fresh faced. I didn't know anyone. I had a car. I rented a room in a house in Hollywood with like punk rock guys who like were like they were like, you know, they would go on tour or local shows, and like you see the guys who bring the guitars out
Yeah.
to bands. They were those kind of guys. They were like stage bands. They would tune the guitars.
They're roadies.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, exactly. So that was a crazy house to live in as a 20-year-old, because every Friday night there'd be like a raging party, and this guy would be like, "Hey man, I just got a tattoo gun. Can I practice on you?" Be like, "No, you're drunk and you've never done this before." So you know, that house was an interesting choice, but that, you know, that experience was crazy. I learned. I think I wouldn't say I learned more working for that show than I did in college, but I learned more about the way life and the world operates, and I learned a lot about myself. I learned about my boundaries. I learned about my limits. I learned about how I can relate to people, what I'm okay with and what I'm not. And, you know, I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but I found I came to realize, and probably more so after, that the environment at that show was kind of toxic, which stemmed from the top. I didn't find him to be a particularly pleasant man. But I think also, as is the case on almost any set you're going to go on, when you're a young intern, they're not going to treat you well.
Yeah.
They just aren't. They don't care. You know, get me my coffee, get me my pizza, you know, go in the editing room and, you know, do this. Fuck you, sort of thing. It's a good learning experience.
It's a good learning experience, but it also takes like the power dynamic that in any form of media or even in any office period that just exists.
I didn't get paid, and that was fine, but I firmly believe that unpaid internships should stop existing. I think it's exploitative. I think it corrupts, and it's an example of how power corrupts. And I think it's another like tenet of systemic racism. And the way the world is set up in power structures, and who gets paid and who gets to do what and who doesn't. You know, if I'm going to come work for you, even if I'm a peon and I'm learning, pay me minimum wage.
Yeah.
At least.
Well, and especially the funny thing for a lot of these internships too is you have to travel.
Yeah.
And those travel expenses to live in LA?
Yeah, I moved across the country. Luckily, I had a car, so I drove my car. I had to rent an apartment, which, you know, LA is a lot more expensive than Philly was. Like, what I paid for that one little room in that house was more than I was paying for my really nice apartment in Philadelphia. Yeah, it was an experience.
And then we were talking about, you know, college and how practically that, like, it's not really about the classes you're taking, but you want to learn about something you love. I think my thing that I've taken away from school so far is how I've grown as a person, just socially, intuitively, even on a professional sense, because I've gained, lost, like different jobs, or in the way how I'm making connections. College for me so far isn't about what I've learned, but how it shaped me. And I think that's, and I would argue that college is a really, depending on the person, is a really necessary experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, look, do I think you have to go to college to be success or have a good life? No, I don't. Especially because I think college is wildly overpriced.
Agreed.
Don't get me started on how I think it's crazy that colleges now are trying to charge the same for tuition when kids are learning at home. Don't even get me started on that. I think when you're like 18, 19, 20, those years are really formative.
Yeah.
So if you're not going to college, whatever it is you're doing at that time, if you're working, you know, whatever it is, that's when you're going to learn a lot about yourself and what sort of impact you want to have on the world. So I don't disagree that college can be a great way to shape you as a person, but I don't think it's necessary or vital. I'm not one of those people, because I know tons of people who have great jobs and are huge successes who didn't go to college or didn't even finish high school. And I'm not advocating for that. I think you should finish high school if you can. It's not always easy for many reasons. It can be elitist to say you have to do that, and I don't want to be that way. But whatever it is you're doing when you're 18, 19, 20, that's important. That'll help shape you, because I agree. The most important thing you learn at college is about things about yourself.
Yeah, and 100%. And I'm a big proprietor of like actually increasing awareness for apprenticeships and actually making those things a real thing in vocational jobs and vocational training. And I think reshaping the way how we view the military and reshaping the way how it can actually be used for better, versus, just a structured, you're going into military to defend your country versus, oh, you're going into military to actually learn things.
Right. I don't want to get too political.
Yeah, sorry.
Soapbox, but I'll say this. Like, okay, let's take a look at the past few months when almost every state was in quarantine. A lot of people were staying home. And then this term started coming to light, essential workers, right? So yeah, of course, medical professionals, doctors, nurses, orderlies, they are essential workers. That's always been the case. But then who else was essential workers? People who worked at grocery stores, people who delivered food, people who worked at like big box stores like Target and Walmart. And these are people who worked at fast food. And these are people who society has always, whether consciously or otherwise, looked down upon or shunned. They don't get paid that much. People in higher power, normally white collar type jobs, sort of stick their nose up on them. But let me tell you, when we were in quarantine, those people in white collar jobs, I said white power jobs, which is a Freudian slip and probably not that far off, because this all is,
no, you're not,
is another like systemic racism issue. But those people in white collar jobs who worked in offices, who worked in finance, who worked on Wall Street, were they essential during quarantine? Were some of them working from home because they were lucky enough to be able to work from home? Sure. Were they necessary to keep the world operating, especially in March and April, like here in New York, for example, when we were locked down like crazy? No. The people that helped the world spin were food workers, delivery workers, transportation, and of course, hospital workers.
That's right.
So we need to reevaluate how the world is structured and who's important and how people get paid.
I agree. And I'm going to end it off this. It's probably sometime later in the week. I'm going to give a amateur defense of UBI, because if unemployment's taught anything, it helps people thrive versus rely. And that's going to be fun. So check out my Twitter for that at DeGraff Live. I've had some really interesting experiences, and I'm happy to share them. But moving on, sorry about that tangent, y'all. Let's have fun with the show. So you go into film school, and then I assume you do your 5th year into television management. What the hell happens after that? Because this is where my gaps of knowing you.
So
don't know.
So it was only a 1-year master's program, which was really enticing to have and I also had to do a thesis, which I didn't finish until like 4 or 5 years after. I procrastinated a lot, frankly, right. And finally got it done, and then finally got my degree. But the fact that the schooling portion of it was only a year was enticing. But about halfway through, I met Elizabeth.
Aww.
She was living in New York. I was living in Philly. We met through a mutual friend. It's a long story, but we started commuting back and forth to spend time with each other just as friends. And then we started dating. And then that summer, because I was still in school through the summer, and she was not in school because she was still in college, but she didn't have summer classes. She came and lived with me in Philly that summer. And then when I finished, we moved to New York. I was 22. She was a little younger. And we're like, okay, let's try and make this work. So we stayed in my parents' house for like 6 months before we got our apartment. I started working with my dad. She was still in school. She was working at Starbucks. She worked at the Disney store for a while. But
she kicks a lot of ass in New York. Like,
yeah.
Whenever she tells me about her 10 different jobs, I'm like, oh my God.
She is one of the things I love about her is how independent and strong she is. And she's one of the hardest worker I know. She was doing full-time school and working 40 hours a week. And then she did the Disney college program. So we were apart for 6 months. I traveled down there like once, twice a month because to see her, but also like I love going to Disney World. So it's an extra excuse. And I got to get in for free at that time, which was awesome. In fact, she stayed on as a seasonal cast member for a couple years, flying down to work just so we kept our free entry for a while. Um,
I can't hate that. I
no,
really can't. And as someone who is a Disney stan for better or worse, as you can literally see here, like there's just something special. And as much as it's a big corporation that really takes maybe too much away from people, it's hard not to go back. It's really hard not to.
yeah, I think there are complex feelings to be had about Disney as a corporation. I think they're one of the major corporations in the world, and because of that, there's always going to be some shady business, some unethical decisions. But the fact is, I love going to the parks, both in Florida and California. That's a big part of my life. It's something I love very much. Um, we've gone to D23 3 times in a row out in LA. It's just something we love to do. So, but yeah, we were just sort of like figuring it out in New York. We were a young couple. She was still in school, just trying to get by. I was very lucky. I'm not saying I didn't do certain things because I met Liz, but that was definitely a factor. Like I had toyed with moving to LA after grad school, but I also think my experience working for that aforementioned show sort of put me off that a little bit because it was intimidating and it was a little toxic and I wasn't sure I was ready or cut out for it.
Yeah. And
Right?
I also think there's some sort of like passive happiness where like you're not necessarily following your partner, but you want to spend time with them. So you're
Yeah,
able to make those compromises where you can actually spend time, and that's part of your happiness.
for
And
sure.
that's something that I think a lot of people need to take away. Is like, no, there's a balance there. It's not one or the other. You can find a balance and
Yeah,
do
we've been together 10 years now and married for 2.5. And there we've made sacrifices for each other at times, and that's part of a healthy relationship, I think. I would never tell anyone to not live their dreams because of their partner, but I think if you can find a way to work together to achieve both of your dreams and takes one sacrifice you compromise, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. And as you were talking about, I think, living in New York at the time. You were talking about New York at one point?
Yeah, no, like I said, we were just, we're a pretty young couple living in New York. Our first apartment was this tiny 1 bedroom in Hell's Kitchen that had mice, and it was very old and, pretty typical starter New York apartment. We lived on top of a bar. There were nights when people would be smoking and we'd have to push them out of the way to get into our apartment because they'd be standing in front of the door to the building. It's a pretty typical first New York experience. And there's something kind of fun and thrilling about that, just making it work. It was me, Liz, and we had a dog named Luna who we still have in this apartment. Then we crazily had a roommate who lived on a futon in the living room for a couple months.
Wow.
Yeah, that wasn't ideal. It was sort of one of my biggest flaws as a person is I often will put the needs of others before myself.
Right.
I will forget to take care of myself, and I don't mean like showering or stuff like that, but like I will put my emotional needs or like my mental health aside if I can help other people. So this was a guy we met who just moved to New York from LA. He was struggling, and we're like, we're going to be moving from this apartment in a couple months anyways. Do you want to crash in the living room for a couple months? And then after that, we got a 2-bedroom apartment because I was more financially stable, as was she. And he was our roommate for a while, and that didn't work out, but that's a long story I'm not going to tell.
Yeah. I just think it's interesting because everyone dreams of like the whole New York thing. If you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere in the world. So you become this, you're working with your dad in real estate. You're doing good for yourself.
Okay.
And then how does this whole Broadway producer thing come about? Because I know it's an overlonging process and it takes a lot of time because you have to save up a certain amount of, money in order so you can start producing, because it's a very close, I would say, network of jobs that are kind of in that circuit.
Yeah, I'll backtrack a little bit. I mean, probably even before I fell in love with movies, I've loved theater, especially musical theater. I said earlier, I spent a lot of time in New York. My parents always took me to shows.
Okay.
I have such vivid memories of going to the theater with my parents. And then when college started, I frequently took, like, they have these things like Megabus, Bolt Bus, these like cheap buses that cost like $10 that you can travel back and forth between Philly and New York. I would come on the weekends, and see shows a lot during college.
That's
So
cool.
I spent a lot, even though I was living in Philly, I did spend a lot of time in New York, and I was very lucky that my dad had an apartment here, so I had a place to crash.
And they also had college tickets too, though, right? Like some Broadway productions would have like discounted
Oh,
college rates.
oh yeah, they used to have like student rush or lotteries. So I can't tell you how many times I would like show up at a theater at like 5, 6 in the morning, get in line with a bunch of other young people, wait for the box office to open, and hope they had student rush tickets for those shows. That still exists to a point. Um, it's now evolved more towards digital lotteries.
Yeah.
Because like shows like Hamilton, Book of Mormon, you were having hundreds of people sleep on the street at night just to try and get not only affordable tickets, but for a while that was the only way to see Hamilton. So they really switched that to digital lotteries for most shows. Some shows still have student rushes, but you need to have an active student ID from your college.
Mhm.
But like in high school, I was in the musicals. The first 2 years I did tech because the English teacher who directed the shows was very biased and would only let freshmen or sophomores in the cast if they were like the second coming of Bernadette Peters.
You're right.
And
I experienced that.
usually women. And then junior and senior year I did the show. So I've always loved theater. I think my love for theater goes back, like I said, even before my love for film. And so one of the reasons I always wanted to move to New York was to see a lot of theater and try and get involved in it. I was, like I said, I was working for my dad, and I applied to some jobs in television, both after college and over the years, because working with my dad has been a roller coaster.
Yeah.
But
and as someone who's interns for their father, it's not horrible, but it's also like working with your family is always just something like, well, I'll do it. I'll just do it.
I mean, the biggest negative, and this is the case with anyone, is like if you're out to dinner with your parents or hanging out with your family, work could come up at any time. There's no separation, right? If you work for another company, when you're hanging out with your family, you're not going to be talking about, oh, we need to do this tomorrow. We need to make these calls. These people need us, whatever it is. And so it never shuts off. So that's something I've definitely had to adjust and come to terms with and learn how to make that work in my relationship with my dad. And it's important to set boundaries. Liz went to college for theatrical lighting design at Marymount Manhattan. So probably even before I did, she knew a lot of people in the industry. Like she met Joe Iconis before I did. I only know him because of her. And she knew this guy, Seth Greenleaf, who is a pretty well-known producer in the industry, because he produced the musical adaptation of 9 to 5 based on the Dolly Parton movie.
Yeah.
And it was struggling at the box office, and he was standing outside the theater handing out free tickets to young people who would promise to then post about it on their social media.
Right.
So this was pretty early on, and I mean, Twitter had been around, but like theater had not really like shifted into using social media. So he was sort of a trailblazer, and that there were a couple other people around the time who were doing similar things. And so they exchanged contact information. And so when I got to the point where I realized not only do I love theater, because I would go like 3-4 times a week. Liz would go a little less. But especially if I could get discounts, I would go a lot. I got to a point where I was doing well, I was making good money. I was like, I want to try and invest in shows, because that's a good first step, because it's kind of passive. Like you invest and give your money as you would if you were buying a stock, and you get reports, but you're not doing anything active.
Right.
Because like, I think what you were saying before, like the key to any business, I think, is networking. So if you start investing in shows, people start noticing you. You start getting put on mailing lists. You start getting offers for other shows. You start meeting people. Because if you're an investor, you do get to still go to opening nights. You get to go to the parties. So it's a great way to meet people. So the first show I invested in was Groundhog Day, the musical.
Interesting. I hadn't known this.
Yeah. It's a show I'm really still very proud of. I think it didn't get a fair shake. I think it was much better than it's the reviews it got and the box office it got. And that was sort of it. And then I started investing in other shows, and it got to a point where I was like, I want more. I want to be active. I want to learn. I want to make a name for myself.
Yeah. and that your first big producer role was in what was it? It's slipping my mind.
Broadway Bounty Hunter.
Broadway Bounty Hunter, and that was, and you showed me some music of it not too long ago. It seems like a show that was a lot of fun, and it was supposed to be a shorter release too, right?
Yeah, so I mentioned Joe Iconis before. He was on my show with PJ Front Center Mezzanine.
So jealous.
I'm
so jealous. So proud of y'all.
I've known him for about 10 years now, and he, other than Seth Greenleaf, Joe has been one of my big ties to the theater community. Mm-hmm. And, for a long time, Joe was doing stuff off Broadway or out of town, and he was doing a lot of cabaret shows at like 54 Below or the Laurie Beachman Theater, where he would just go and play his songs. And I always knew if I had the opportunity, I wanted to support Joe's art in a bigger context. So before Broadway Bounty Hunter, when it got announced that Be More Chill was coming off Broadway, I called him and was like, I want in. So he connected me with the producer, who was someone else I knew and was friendly with. She's also actually from Boca. Her name is Jennifer Tepper. She's great. She's like a noted theater historian. She's written 3 volumes about the history of theater. And I think she's working on more. A lot of times now, if like CBS Sunday Morning or other shows want someone who's knowledgeable and want to talk to, they'll bring her on. Like she's awesome, and I'm
kind of cool,
lucky and honored to call her a friend. And I was like, I want to help. I want to invest in Be More Chill, and I want to be a part of like the Joe Iconis experience. Whatever you have going forward, call me first. So she called me like a year before Broadway Bounty Hunter and asked me to get involved. And what I did with that was actually interesting. I gave front money, which is different than investing. But so you're giving money even before a show is 100. It's a big risk. I'm not going to lie, because you're assigning something that says, even if the show doesn't make it to stage at all in any capacity, I'm giving money for these artists to help develop it.
Okay.
But both because I had known Joe for a long time and I believe so much in his talent, I took the risk, and it worked because the show came off Broadway. I got to be a producer of the show. My name is on the poster. My name was in the playbill. Let me tell you, that first time seeing my name and like a bio that I wrote in a playbill took my breath away. I sort of flash back to high school or younger Maxwell, like dancing around my room and singing along to musicals. I never could have imagined that it was something I could accomplish. Like it always felt so out of reach. Like we set goals for ourselves and we say, I want to make a film. I want to be involved in Broadway. I want to do this and that. But do you ever really think that that's going to happen? There's always this like thing of self-doubt. So it was a major, major moment for me to see my name, Maxwell Haddad, producer, in a bio with information about myself in a playbill. It was just like one of the best days of my life.
And what's really cool about that is it takes time, and it takes time to do something like that. But it wasn't like, you went way out of your way and you bugged too many people, or it was just an explosion. It definitely seemed like a real progression. And
yeah, I mean, I believe very strongly in being kind and nice to everyone, because you never know when they may come back into your circle and you may need them. And I believe in forging relationships, and that's what it was. Like you said, it was a natural progression of me building and networking relationships, and my wife, who has been an incredible asset and help because she knows a lot of people too. She worked in the industry and still dabbles in it, of building friendships and relationships and being kind and thoughtful and checking in, sending emails or texts, be like, hey, how's it going? And keeping tabs on things, because those people, like the next show I got involved in as a producer was The Inheritance. I was still investing in shows, like I'm involved in Hadestown, which I am incredibly proud of. When it won Best Musical at the Tony, and then I got to go to the after party with the cast and the crew when it won the Tony. That was, can I curse?
Yeah.
That was fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, oh my God, I'm at a Tony after party and these people just won Best Musical and I was a little part of that. That was another like watershed moment for me. But then the next show I got involved in as a producer was The Inheritance, which I got involved in because of Seth Greenleaf. So this is a man that Elizabeth met on the street because he was giving out tickets in exchange for social media impressions, who 7 or 8 years later, I am now producing a play with him.
Yeah.
You just never know who you meet and what context could come back and help you later on.
And it got nominated and did some really cool stuff, didn't it?
Right. I won a Drama Desk Award and I won a
Yes.
Drama League Award, which, man, like I ordered my trophies, and the fact that I'm going to have a fucking Drama Desk Award to put on my shelf is mind blowing.
So for people who are film fans and aren't too involved in Broadway award season, outside of the Tony, so what does that mean? Like, what's a similar equivalence?
Yeah, so obviously the Tonys would be like the equivalent of the Oscars. The Drama Desk and the Drama League Awards would be more akin to like the Guild Awards. So it's very impressive. Like, a lot of people will say like, oh, well, you only won this, you didn't win the Tony, or you didn't win the Oscar. It's a major award voted on by an impressive body of people. It would be like winning a Screen Actors Guild or a Directors Guild or a Golden Globe to a certain extent, although it's not as frothy and inessential as the Golden Globes are. So the Inheritance, the show was challenging. It was 2 parts and 7 hours long. Each part was like 3.5 hours. It's a big risk, because again, musicals are always my number one. I love plays, but musicals are more likely to make money. Plays are a bigger risk, especially trying to sell 2 tickets for a 7-hour show. That's tough, but it was a play I loved and believed in, and I thought its message was very powerful. And the representation, because it was all about gay men and their experiences and learning from their past. And it dealt with the AIDS crisis, and it dealt with all sorts of fascinating stuff.
I cannot wait for the day when I come up to New York to visit y'all, and I get to pay a ticket for a show that has the name Maxwell Haddad on it. That's gonna be one of my favorite moments.
I don't know what's gonna happen. It's been Broadway, I would say, and the theater industry at large has been hit as hard, if not harder, than any other industry.
Oh yeah.
Because with movies, theaters are closed and a lot of movies are pushing back, but in some places production has started up again. They're shooting The Little Mermaid right now. I think Batman's going back into production.
World Dominion is shooting right now.
Jurassic World is shooting. They're getting ready to gear up production again on Mission Impossible. And then, of course, some movies chose to go to VOD, so they still had a way to make it accessible and get money for it. But Broadway shut down on March 14th, and it's been announced that it won't open until at least January of next year. And even that, based on how things are going, seems maybe
very unlikely.
I don't know. I mean, we could get a vaccine, things could change. But think about it. Broadway theaters are mostly very old. The seats are very close together. There are some movie theaters like that, but mostly now, especially with like recliners and stuff, you're sitting further apart. And just like the pure economics of it, there is no way you could operate a Broadway show at anything less than trying to sell 100% capacity.
Yep.
It just doesn't work because you have so many things you have to pay. You have to pay rent for the theater. You have to pay residuals to the writers and director. You have to pay all your salaries for your actors, for your stagehands, and they're all unions, which I love. I think the unions are great, but that means they get paid a lot. There's just, not only the money you raise to capitalize the show, but the weekly running costs make it prohibitive.
It's one of those things where it's not like it's a one-time budget. Like, take a movie, Bad Boys for Life, where it's an $80 budget and then it gets sent off. The profits are shared between the theater and a different couple of investors and the studio.
Yep.
No, it is a continuous process of where you are giving people money and you're making profits of small margins, incremental margins.
Right. So like for a show, you'll raise 15, 20, whatever $1 million, but then your weekly running cost will still be $6, $7, $8, $900,000 just to operate it. 900 those are like the mega musicals. That's not super common, but you can't say, okay, we're only going to sell 50% of the seats and keep them spaced out. The numbers just don't work.
No, it just doesn't.
I really don't know what's going to happen. We already saw that Frozen decided to close, and Frozen was doing well. It was making over $1 million a week. That was an expensive show to run, and I don't know if it had recouped. Recoup means they had grossed back all the money for the capitalization and then can start distributing profit shares to all the investors and producers. So I don't know if it recouped, but still, that a Disney, it could have. I'm not sure. Disney is less forthcoming than other producers are. But the fact that a mega musical based on one of the most popular animated movies of all time decided to close means anything could happen next. Anything. So I just don't know. I still want to be a producer. I just don't know what's going to happen. And I really think my plan is to let 2021 go by just sort of watching what happens.
Yeah.
For me,
same.
at my
Totally.
age and my what I have going on, I think it's too big of a risk to get involved next year. If I was, a multimillionaire, it might be a different story. I might be, but the
It's
other
easier
thing,
to take those big risks.
right. The other thing I did, like around the same time as Bounty Hunter and Inheritance and stuff, as I started meeting more and more people, I started producing concerts at places like 54 Below. So I worked with Rob Rikicki, who wrote The Lightning Thief, and I produced a concert of his album Monster Songs at 54 Below in October, close to Halloween. That album is fucking fire. It's on Spotify. Go listen to it. He wrote a song cycle where each song is sung from the perspective of a different monster. You have like the Yeti and Medusa and the witch and the dragon, and they're all like sharing their feelings and their experiences.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the songs are great. And then I worked with Preston Max Allen, who was our first guest on Front Center Mezzanine, and I produced a concert of his show, Carrie 2, an unauthorized musical parody. So there is a sequel to Carrie called The Rage. It's terrible, but it's hilarious. And he wrote a musical based on that movie, and I produced the concert of it. It's great fun. And I love doing concerts because it's normally a one-night thing. As the producer of that, you get to be super hands-on, because even like with Bounty Hunter and The Inheritance, I'm just a co-producer. I'm not the lead producer. So I'm in the meetings and I have a voice, but I'm not making active decisions. I'm not hiring. I'm not firing. I'm not signing checks. But for these concerts, the buck stopped at me and my partners, because I have a small company with 2 partners. But I did a good amount of work in those concerts, and I got to decide who we hired, alongside the artist. Like, my goal as a producer, and I think this should be the goal of any producer, is you are there to make the artist look as good as possible and carry out their vision.
Right.
And I strongly believe in, especially because I'm a white male, working with and lifting up voices who may otherwise not get the opportunity to do so. I haven't always been the best at that. I have worked with a lot of white male because, like Joe is just someone I've known for a long time. So it was natural to want to work with him. But one of our company's goals, and something I hope to do going forward especially, is amplify those voices that I think deserve a seat at the table and have been looked over. Because, again, I don't want to get too political, but Broadway and the theater industry likes to think of itself as a progressive industry. It's not. It's not at all. Systemic racism is very prevalent in Broadway. Just go look at websites and look at the cast of most shows. Look at the directors. Look at the producers. In the meetings I've been in and the producing teams I've worked with, it's very rare to come across someone who's not white and not predominantly male.
I think and you and I have talked about this plenty. I think the paywall and just the wall in general, the accessibility wall to Broadway is so hard and so difficult, and especially like to do something that I want to do, and it doesn't have to be on Broadway or even film something in terms of producing. The fact that I have to have money in my pocket to do something like that, and I can't like apprentice or something to work myself up.
Well, I do know some people who have gotten either low end or internships at theater production companies and work their way up to the point where they get to produce because of who they know. Here's an interesting tidbit, and I hope I'm not like pulling the curtain back too much, but in order to invest in a show, you need to qualify financially per the government. There is like literally a checklist that the government says that you can only invest your money in a Broadway show if you meet one of these following criteria. If you want to produce a show, you don't have to meet any criteria, because one of the main things that a producer on a show does is raise money. So if you said, I'm going to produce this show, if you got the opportunity to do so, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you then go and pitch people who have money and beg them to give you their money so that you can get credited and produce the show.
Right.
So it's always fascinating to me that to be higher involved in the show as a producer, it doesn't matter. You don't have to fit any criteria, but the investors do. And lots of other industries don't have those investors criteria. Like if you wanted to go buy Apple stock tomorrow, there would be no, checklist you would have to, fall into per the government. It's very interesting to me. And one of the things my partners and I have talked about, and it's a lofty goal, but we want to try and find ways to change that, because I think accessibility is a key for theater in many ways. On the investment and production end, there's tons of young people who have money or don't have money and want to get involved, and they just don't have a way in.
Yep.
And there are roadblocks and red tape that in some cases I think make sense and in some don't. But then on the flip side, look, theater is very expensive to go to. And yes, shows do have things like we were talking about before, lottery, student rush, this, that, and the other thing. And as someone who has produced and invested in shows, I, to a strong point, understand why it's so expensive, because the amount of money it costs to put on the show is astronomical. Just in renting the theater alone, because to me, at the end of the day, Broadway is a real estate game. There's 44 Broadway theaters. Your goal putting on a show is getting your hands on one of those theaters and putting up your show. And in order to do that, you got to pay a lot of money. So to a certain point, tickets are so expensive because they have to be. But I think there are creative ways to work around that and find more accessible avenues going forward. Because if it's not more accessible, my fear is there won't be older theater goers in 10, 15, 20 years because we've priced the younger theater goers out. Like I look back to the early to mid 2000s when I was coming to New York a lot. I could go see Rent and sit like fourth row center in the orchestra for $90. It's a lot of money. Now, if you want to go see a Broadway show and sit fourth row center, you're paying $220, $250, $275. Yeah.
And even on that, a matinee Dear Hansen ticket for me in 2017, I was in the balcony. Cost me $280.
Yeah. It's crazy. And yeah, inflation is a thing, and certainly, but that's not inflation. That's a whole other thing.
And what I think is interesting to me, and I think there's some walls that are gonna have to be teared down about theater etiquette and how people view the theater. And I do believe in theater etiquette. I grew, like I said, I went to high school doing theaters, but like introducing some different revenues to make money within your show just passed. Here's this one table of merchandising, and you can get one drink during your break.
I've talked about this very thing. I have ideas. My partners have ideas. I don't want to give them away.
No.
It's just there's some exciting ideas we've pitched to people and they've turned them down, and other ideas we want to implement. And the other thing is a preponderance of the people who get to make the decisions are middle-aged and older white men who, besides the fact that there's not nearly enough representation and unique voices, are stuck in the old ways of doing things. They are not open to hearing fresh ways to approach marketing a show, merchandising a show, making unique revenue streams, like you said, not just the ticket and maybe a $20 glass of soda and an $85 hoodie. There are so many things you could do, because if you look at what TV and movies does, they find very unique ways to cash in on their property that I think Broadway could look into. And maybe if they're doing those things, they can then lower the prices of tickets in some ways.
I agree, and it becomes more accessible to more people. Well, we're coming up on the hour mark here, and obviously there's always, and I think what I like about Famous Last Words is it's a little bit shorter. I can always bring people back on. Sorry to cut us off here. The conversation's great, but we do have this segment on the show, which if you've watched once or twice, you should be aware, called Famous Last Words. Is the title of the show. Practically give yourself a scenario or, your lasting words or something that you want people to remember. And then I'm gonna put it on a spin and let you know what my famous last words would be. So, Max, what would you say your famous last words are?
I mean, it's sort of something I've already said, but it's something I believe in strongly. And, call me naive, but my famous last words would be always act with kindness and empathy, because I believe that is the best course for anyone to move forward and have success later in life.
Yeah, I kind of spot on there. You and I have talks. I think our mindsets are very similar in that we're like kind and empathy first. And I have and you brought it up early, the fault of like putting others in front of yourself. I deal with that heavy, where I'll strain myself and strain what I do for other people, but it's fine. Whenever you act in kindness and have empathy for others, and compassion, I think is a word that I'm beginning to use a little bit more.
Yeah.
It goes a long way. My famous last words in this, so I usually try and do it to relate it to my guest. When I went to New York and went to go see Dear Evan Hansen, the trip was pretty pricey. But they weren't my famous last words. I was pitching it to my family because I was like, I really want to go on this yearbook trip. It'd be a really cool time. I love the city. Their famous last words were, "Yeah, I guess so." And then I got sent to New York. I loved it. I actually ended up falling in love with Harlem, a underrated burb. And yeah, those are kind of my famous last words. Again,
I have another famous last words that relates to that, if you want. You only get one shot at life. Don't prohibit yourself from experiencing joy because of, factors that in the long scheme of things are not going to matter a year or 2 years from now.
Yeah. No, exactly. Take your shot. If we learned anything from Hamilton, don't throw away your shot.
Although he does at the end, and that's what kills him. Spoilers, but...
Spoilers! As I literally say it.
You can't really spoil, 300-plus-year-old history.
Or the first song of a musical.
Correct. Well, you could, but... Yeah.
Well, anyways, Max, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun. The hour went by so fast.
It's a great... having you on was a great return to form for the show. I skimped out a lot. Life gets in the way, and when life gives you lemons, you make Maxwell Haddad. So anyways, where can the people find you online?
Put on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
You can follow me on Twitter at Cinemaxwell, which you can see below me. My Instagram is at Cinemaxwell Inc. because someone else has at Cinemaxwell and never uses it, and that upsets me. I'm frequently on the PJ Campbell Network. We'll be doing another episode of Front Center Mezzanine next Thursday, August 6th. Not announcing the guest yet because I'm still working on it, but I'm excited about a couple possibilities I've been in touch with. And I'll be on probably Family Feud Saturday night. Which
I think you are on. There's no probably. You can't skip out on this disaster. I'm
going to be at my parents' house.
Oh.
So I just have to be like, I got to go upstairs and do this thing at 10 o'clock. So I'm sure I'll do it, but I won't be in my normal studio here.
You're not going to have that fresh poster behind you, the fresh white wall with the black cabinet to your left.
And I'm not going to have my ring light or my nice webcam. I'll just have my MacBook Air and a whim and a prayer.
Oh no, Rick. Anyways, you guys can find me live at Evan DeGraff on Twitter, here at Evan DeGraff Live on Twitter. Famous Last Words should be returning to form again next week. I'm going to work on a couple of guests. However, full disclosure, I just got a job. So I'm working pretty long hours. Thank you, Max. I'm working longish hours, so I'm going to keep you guys updated on that. I promise you, I'm not trying to skip out on the show or on the network. Real life is a thing sometimes. But you follow me on there and I'll keep you guys updates. I'll be on the Watch on Friday, Family Game Night on Saturday, and I'm gonna probably rewatch a little bit of Batman the Animated Series so I can re-involve myself in that conversation. And I'm really excited. So with that, peace adieu. Check out all of our programming and follow us on Twitter at PJCN, PJ Campbell, PJC Network on Twitter.
PJC Network.
It's gonna take a little bit. It's new. Anyways, see y'all later. Bye-bye.